Have fun.
All right, bye, Kate.
You're good.
Okay, hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Sir Nexus Grow, and I am here right now to teach everyone how to use bias tape in the correct manner. So I think that the most important
Strove.
uh, yeah, I think that the most important part of this particular class is to first understand what bias tape is. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a package of bias tape right here. Oh, I'm going to turn it over so you can actually read it. Oh, no. It's backwards, damn it. So anyway,
No, we can read it.
Okay. Oh, good. This is bias tape. It's extra wide, double fold. You can get it thinner than that, but you do want double fold if you're doing the ends of pieces of fabric where you want to completely case them. So here I really like this particular width, and yes, you can make your own. That will be for a later time. We're not going to cover how to make your own bias tape, but it's actually pretty damn easy. So bias tape, why is it called that? Bias tape is called that because of the fact that when it is made with pieces of fabric that are cut on a bias. Because I happen to teach both biology and math, we're going to talk about this on terms of the Euclidean plane. So you have the x and you have the y-axis. So you have pieces of fabric that are, I should say actually like yarn or string, that are going this way and going this way. Bias means that you're actually working along the z-axis. So if you take your piece of fabric and you look at it, you're going to have pieces of fabric that are going this way and pieces that are going this way. So when you make bias tape, you're actually turning it so that you have this sort of diagonal crisscross of lines. And the reason that bias tape is made that way is because it just so happens that it stretches, which makes bias tape fantastically superior when you're actually binding edges, because it will go around very tight circles and all sorts of different places where you would not expect normal fabric to be able to bend. So this is this sort of, well, I mean, it actually looks like sage green. I'm not actually sure what color this is because we have terrible lighting. It might be sage green or it might be steel gray. Who knows? And who cares? Because no matter what, I'm actually going to be using black thread for this to show how this thing works. So what I've done is I've actually taken a piece of yellow fabric. It's terrible, but I've cut it into vaguely a square. This is the Symphony broadcloth that you get at Joann's for like $2.99 a yard. I fucking hate this fabric. It's terrible. Really terrible. It doesn't last very long, and it totally will just shred itself to pieces. So a little bit about fabric before we begin. Fabric, no matter what it is absolutely your friend. You just need to know how to trade it. And the thing about sewing, along with the potter's wheel, I was just recently talking to somebody about this, is that there are many different arts that you can do, but there are a handful of arts where the thing that you are using will try to dominate you. In arts and crafts, no matter what it is really about domination and submission. There are many different types of arts in which you have no resistance and you can totally do whatever you want and the medium will totally submit to you. There are certain things, like for example the potter's wheel, in which if you go into it weakly without really understand then that you have to put the complete force of your will behind it, it won't do anything for you. It will actually own you. And the same thing is true about the sewing machine. So you have to be completely comfortable with being able to tell the sewing machine with your hands where you want things to go. Now, before I do that, I would like to go ahead and give people a heads up on what I think is one of the best ways for you to actually get comfortable with not only using your sewing machine, but also experimenting with the many different stitches that they have, and then also sewing a straight line. And how do we do that? We buy index cards. Buy a pack of index cards. They have a complete, white side on the back, and on the underside they have all of these lines. And so it's great because a fresh needle that you put into your sewing machine should very easily be able to poke lots and lots of holes all along this. The great thing about the index card on the other side where they have the lines is that these are all perfectly straight. So all you end up doing, and I will turn this really quickly to put it down. I'll angle this down into the sewing machine. So I'm going to go ahead and line up my foot straight onto the red line, which is at the top of index card, and I'm going to use this I'll bring it up, and then now what I've done is I have created a perfectly straight line all along the red line of that index card. This is a great thing for anyone who is getting into sewing to do. Grab your index card and go all along these lines. And that's going to help you in the end, because that's really what a lot of people who start sewing really struggle with, is making those straight lines. Because one of the things that I absolutely look for when I'm judging pieces of sewing is when they actually turn over a seam and they start to sew it down. I really want to see the seams sewn exactly on the edges so that they're right there. They're not halfway around the seam. They're right there at the very edge. That shows a lot of skill. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you now our fabric, and now I've got this piece of bias tape right here. Now on the piece of bias tape, if you happen to have bias tape on you, I'm going to put it on the other side because this one was like improperly made, because sometimes you have to deal with that when you go and buy things. So I've got this piece of bias tape. If I turn it around, actually if I keep it up right here, I don't know if you can see it, but
if you back it up from the camera a little bit.
So I have this piece of bias tape right here. It's perfectly folded, and you might notice that there's a tiny bit of overlap right there. And that's because when bias tape is made, there's actually a tiny difference in the width of the bias tape. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to locate the wider side of the bias tape. Now, double fold bias tape. The reason it's called double fold bias tape is because first you start with one piece and it's folded in half, and then each of those side folds are folded again in half. So if you open it up like this, you'll see that there are 1, 2, 3 folds. So I'm going to just go ahead and let it fold back in place right here. And you're going to want to take that wider piece right there. Alright, so you take this wider piece right here and you open it up so it is to your right, and then you open it up one more time. And so you will see that you have this right hand side little fold right there. Okay? So once you have that, you're going to go ahead and take your fabric it's weird now because, of course, I have to do this on a completely different perspective. You're going to take this right-hand piece right here, and you're going to want to line it up with the edge of your fabric, just like that. And now, what you want to do is you don't want to start at the corner, because chances are you're probably going to make some sort of garment that has a huge seam all the way around, and you're going to end up using a lot of bias tape. Not a problem. So we're going to start a little bit down from that. I'm going to line it up to the edge right there. Now, again, I said that there were 3 different little folds right here. So you're going to follow this right-hand fold. Now, I strongly urge you to go ahead and pin this. I fucking hate pinning. Hate it. I will totally avoid it if I can. But I cannot stress to you any more than this. If you're doing bias tape, just pin. No matter how good you think you are, just pin. It will absolutely make it better. So go ahead and take your fabric just like this, and you're going to pin it. But before you do so, what you're going to do is you're going to take this corner that's very close to the edge, and you're actually going to turn it in. I'm going to turn it in right now, so that it actually creates this sort of right triangle. And I'll show you that in just one second. So you're going to fold it inwards so that it creates something like that right there. Now that looks totally wrong because, of course, I'm fiddling with the camera. I'm going to move it over to the edge right here. Okay, so that should be really what we're looking for right there. Is this folded over triangle right there that's along the edge of the fabric. And it just so happens with this particular bias tape, you're pretty much going to be working at, if you have your needle in the middle position, you're going to end up working at a little over the 1/4 inch of the seam on your sewing machine. So if I move it over right there, now what I'm going to be doing is from the very edge, I'm going to be stitching along with my bias tape lined up along the fabric, this outside fold. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch this down very quickly. Sorry guys, it's just a little weird to get myself situated on this sewing machine while doing this. Okay, so I'm going to, again, just put this down. It may be hard from this perspective, but then I'm going to open my bias tape and then just fold it over to create a 90-degree triangle. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I have got my foot lifted right now. I'm going to put it right under, so that is the 1/4 inch mark, which, by the way, for people who cannot find the 1/4 inch mark, it is when your needle is in the middle position and your fabric is lined up to the right side of the foot perfectly. That is your 1/4 inch position. So now I am taking the fabric and I'm lining it up completely. I do urge you to absolutely put in the pinning devices, which, you know, are called pins, but I don't know what the hell I'm talking about right now. So I've got a pin right here. I'm going to go ahead, and by the way, there are many different ways to pin. Most people like to actually take a pin and they actually take it and they push it directly parallel to the seam. They go straight up and down. I hate that way. And so what I do is I take a pin and I actually put it in perpendicular to the seam. And the reason that I like that is that as you're sewing, it's very easy for you to pull away from the side rather than pull away from, well, you know, the foot itself. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew this directly down that tiny little piece right there. Now I've gotten to here, and I'm going to pull out this one pin I just put in. I'm going to sew all along that right-hand ditch. Oh, I'm going to put my foot back down and actually sew back a little bit, and then I'll take it out. I'll take a short intermission, and then I'll show you what to do next. Okay, great. Sorry, nature called for any of those playing at home. So now that I have put that down onto the piece of fabric, what I have is something that looks like, grab a laptop now and put it this way. So we have a piece of fabric now that looks like this, where we have, I'll open it up right here. So I have that outside piece that's sewn all the way down, and then we have a middle seam, and we have now also the outside seam there. So you wanted to sew all the way along that edge of the widest part of your bias tape. And once you've done that, then what you do, I don't know if I mentioned this, and I think it's actually quite important, is that when you're sewing it down, that widest part actually goes on the outside of your fabric. You want it to go on the outside of your fabric because actually, as you're bringing it around, you want to create one single line as you're sewing. Because that's one of the downfalls many times, is that whenever you're actually putting on bias tape, what happens is that either you'll do one of two things. You will sandwich the bias tape immediately and sew it down and then not catch one side of the fabric. Or what you'll do is you'll sew one side down, sew it on the other side, and then you'll have two lines going on. And while sometimes that can actually look quite decorative, it's not technically correct and doesn't look quite as clean. So here we have this piece right here, and I'm going to show everyone how to do the corners in a second. But that will require a different piece, so I'll start on the other side after that. So here we have now this right triangle at the top, and we've sewn all the way to the bottom. And now what you're going to want to do is this. You're going to want to take your bias tape and then naturally fold it that first time along that first little bit, and then fold it around your edge so that when you get to the back, what you have is this. You know, this other side, and then you will notice on the side that you actually began with, there's no line whatsoever. There is no sew line at all. Now, from here, there are two different theories when it comes to bias tape. There are some people who want to take an iron and actually iron it down further than the sewing line, so that whenever they actually go to sew, they do something called stitching in the ditch. So I didn't bring the iron out for that, but I'm going to go ahead and explain how that works. Here's the back of the fabric, the right-hand side of the fabric, and I have gone and I folded it over, which I'm going to do right now. So I'm folding it over now, just like this. And if I just kind of shrug it over just a little bit, you might be able to see that sewing line right there. Now, if you wanted to, you could ease the bias tape over and go ahead and pin it down, maybe every half an inch. And from there, what you'll do is turn it around and do something called stitching in the ditch. Stitching in the ditch means that you're going to line up. Right now, you're going to see between the yellow and the gray-green fabric that's right here, that line right there that delineates them, that's the ditch, and you're going to be sewing all along that, so that when it turns out, it's going to look like there's no actual seam at all in the front, and when you turn it in the back, there will just be one seam. That's one way to do it. The other way is, which is, again, totally acceptable and still looks totally great, is that when I turn this fabric over, and I've gone over like this, now I'm going to take the wrong side of the fabric, so we're calling this the wrong side, and I'm going to go back in with the sewing machine. I'm going to sew as close to the edge as possible all the way down, so that on the outside there's only one sew line, and it's going to be the same for the inside. And you're going to want to do that as close to the edge as possible. Now, I'm using black thread for this, but typically if you do this particular method, where you're going as close to the edge as possible, on the outside it's actually going to extend past the sew line, so you're going to want to try and use a type of thread that is the same hue as your base fabric. So I'm going to show you with the black, using this second method that I talked about. So I'm going to take this wrong side of the fabric, I'm going to sew it down on the edges, and we'll see what we get. Okay, so now that I've sewn that, I'm going to show you the outside, the actual side of the fabric that you're going to see on a garment that you're going to wear. And here you can actually see that there is a rather pretty inconspicuous line And there are some places where it actually kind of went over onto the line itself, but otherwise it kind of stitched in the ditch. And granted, I am using a thread that is completely, contrasted to the colors that I'm actually using. But if I were using, for example, say a yellow, or even if I were using a green, it wouldn't matter because the margins are so small between that it would fit in seamlessly with the fabric. So now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and show everyone how to do corners. So I'm going to go ahead and snip off what I've done right now and go ahead and show you the correct way to do corners. Corners do not have to be 90 degrees at all. They can be whatever degree you want to. That's the beauty of using bias tape, is because it is cut on the bias, it goes around corners and it will go to pretty much any angle that you want it to. You just need to know how to sew it correctly. So again, we're going to look at here the bias tape and find the wider edge. And I'm going to start on a piece of fabric. I'm going to take the wider edge of the fabric, so here I have the wider edge of the fabric. I'm going to find it on the other side really quickly. And I'm going to open up the bias tape. Now once I've opened up the bias tape, I'm going to do the same thing that I was talking about before. I'm going to go ahead and take the bias tape. Preferably you should go ahead and pin it down. Then you're going to make your 90-degree angle so that you have that triangle on the top. I'm trying to show this while also realizing that the bias tape is a saucy wench and does not want to do what I am telling it to do. So here's your 90-degree angle at the top. And so once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and sew it down. Now here's the big kicker. You're going to look at your 3 different folds, and you're going to regard how wide they are. So each one of those should be roughly about, the same size. Now, if you know how wide they are, then you know the width at which you have to stop at the very, very end of your sew line. Now, what I meant is this. If I'm sewing from where I just put my 90-degree angle, and I'm going to an edge, I'm going to stop as soon as I get to a width of about the, one of those little folds of the bias tape. So let's say, for example, that I'm not entirely sure actually how wide this is. I'd say it was about 1/4 of an inch. So what you're going to do is, if each one of those little folds is about 1/4 of an inch, you're going to want to stop at 1/4 of an inch from the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this down, and that at about 1/4 of an inch from the bottom, I'm going to stop and I'm going to back stitch at least 3 stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Now this is a very important note, not specifically for bias tape, but just for sewing in general. Whenever you stop with your sewing, no matter what you're doing, whenever you stop, you always make sure to have your sewing needle down into the fabric. If it is in an up position, go ahead and reach to the right-hand side of your sewing machine and turn the wheel until the needle is all the way down into the fabric. And the reason we do that is because we make sure that the fabric is not warping or moving while we're doing adjustments. Because otherwise there's going to be these really weird like sew lines and skipped stitches because we forced our machine to do that. So now what I'm doing is I'm just going to complete this sewing, and I'm going to stop at about 1/4 of an inch, and now I'm going to push down my lever, and I'm going to sew back a couple stitches. I bring my foot up, bring my needle up, and now I'm going to go ahead and just trim those little excess bits right here. And now here is honestly the trickiest part, and it's really not all that difficult, but I want to make sure that I show it in full. Alright, I have sewn right now until basically the edge, right there. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take this fabric that you've laid out completely, just like this, and you're going to want to fold it up again into one of those 90-degree angles, just like this. And then once you sew it into your 90-degree angle, you just want to sew it back in the same way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I brought it to a 90-degree angle, flush with the bottom part of my fabric, and then all I'm going to do is just fold it back so that it looks like this right here. So I folded it into that triangle. The triangle stays, but then I just fold it back again so that now it is flush with that. And you see how I've got that bottom little ditch still there? And then once I do that, I just take that ditch, I can pin it how I see fit, and then I just stitch it down again. And once I come to another corner, I do the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch it down, and I'm going to show you how, by the beauty of actually putting this in correctly, how it creates the most beautiful mitered corners, and so that everything is perfectly even all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this down, and then I'll show you how to turn it out and how to make sure those corners are absolutely perfect. Not going to worry about that corner because this is just a tutorial. Otherwise, I would do the same thing I did earlier. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that excess fabric. And so now, what we are left with is something that looks like this hot mess right here. Yeah, it's all ugly and gross, but it turns into magic the moment that you turn it over. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take, again, that seam, push it up into the middle part of the bias tape, and then turn it over so it looks like that. And then as you go down, what you want to do is you want to actually do the same thing until the very, very edge of your bias tape, going all the way down, and then turn it out on the other side as well. So essentially what happens is this. You're going to have these two pieces, okay? that are competing for attention. They both want to be a part of the corner, and they can be, and also make a beautiful little miter, but you just need to do a little bit of, well, finagling. So this is what you do. You're going to go ahead and take one side and completely go to the edge of the fabric, and then from there, fold the other piece over. And that should almost always make a perfect miter. Now you see that this is kind of a bit off, but that's okay, because fabric is our bitch. And that means that it has to do whatever we want it to do. So all we have to do is open that up, and then just kind of move it just a little bit over, and keep doing it. And if we finagle with our hands just enough, we'll be able to make this perfect 45-degree angle, and then sew it down. Now, it's much easier to do when I'm actually putting it in front of me and actually doing the little shiftiness. But you'll see that if you're actually moving it with your hands, it's actually pretty damn simple to do. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to move it over, I'm going to put it in my perspective so I can actually do it. And then I'll sew it down and then show you what it looks like. And again, now I'm in this finagling phase, so what I'm going to do is I have my needle down, I'm going to lift up the foot, and now from here, I can very easily just maneuver this fabric until it does exactly what I want it to do. And thankfully, one of the beauties about actually doing it the proper way is that once you actually try and finagle your actual, mitering on the back, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about the front. It will be perfect, and it will be perfect every time. All right. Great. I'll turn it. Go ahead and do the other side. And then turn it up. And now what we are left with is this nice 45-degree mitered corner without any problems. And that same technique, by the way, will work on whatever corner you want it to do. So essentially, no matter what shape of your garment, unless you're quite honestly using something that is doing incredibly violent loop-de-loops or violent loop-de-loops and so on and so forth, you should have a pretty easy time using the bias tape. Again, the advantage of bias tape is that because it is actually put together with pieces of fabric that are on the bias, it's very easy because they're slightly stretchy for them to go around corners and things like that. I've done tons of things that have very violent corners and actually like very rounded shapes, but it does reach its limit after a time. I think that bias tape can be incredibly attractive, and I think that it also, at a later time, I'd like to actually do a thing where we actually make our own bias tape, because um, bias tape, a lot of people discount it, but that's only because it's so incredibly common. But there's a reason for that. It's fantastic, and I definitely urge more people to make their own, not only because it's actually pretty simple and a great craft to have in your sort of wheelhouse, but at the same time, it's great to be able to use your own pieces of fabric and create your own bias tape that actually coordinates with it. Um, so, unless there are any particular questions out there, which I don't think there will be, but if there are any questions out there, I'd love to hear from them. Otherwise, this has been a nice tutorial that I hope many people learned things from. I'm Nexus, and here's hoping that I see some amazing graphs from you. And